Can you take your seats, please?
صباح الخير على حضراتكم مشاهدينا من العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة، والتي ستشهد بعد قليل تشريف السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي إلى هنا، إلى العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة، وذلك من أجل الافتتاح الرسمي للفعاليات الخاصة بالاجتماعات السنوية للبنك الأفريقي للتصدير والاستيراد أفريكسمبانك. هذه الاجتماعات التي تحمل عنوان في منتهى الأهمية في هذه الفترة تحديدا: تفعيل الاتفاقية الخاصة بالتجارة الحرة الإفريقية القارية في حقبة ما بعد
activating the potential of the African continental free trade area and empowerment of the youth.
مشاهدينا من هنا من مقر العاصمة الإدارية
Good morning from
الآن في انتظار تشريف السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي.
Now we are waiting the President of for the opening
وتصدير أفريكسمبانك في نسخته 29 من هنا من مقر العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة، لما لها من أهمية استراتيجية كونها تعد مركزا متكاملا في المستقبل للمال والأعمال في منطقة الشرق الأوسط والقارة الأفريقية. البنك الأفريقي للاستيراد والتصدير أفريكسمبانك هو بنك أو مؤسسة مالية متعددة الأطراف لجميع بلدان القارة الأفريقية، معني بدعم وتمويل التجارة البينية داخل أفريقيا وخارجها. تأسس البنك في أكتوبر من عام 1993 ويملكه الحكومات الأفريقية بنك التنمية الأفريقي وعدد من مؤسسات التمويل الأفريقية، وأيضا عدد من مؤسسات القطاع الخاص.
القطاع الخاص بالفعل له دور كبير في هذه الاجتماعات التي تنعقد خلال هذا العام في العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة. القطاع الخاص سيكون له دور كبير أيضا كما ذكرنا في العنوان الخاص بهذه الاجتماعات: الشباب، تمكين الشباب أيضا من الأولويات التي سيتم مناقشتها في الجلسات الخاصة بهذه الاجتماعات، بالإضافة أيضا إلى تمكين المرأة بشكل كبير لما لها من دور هام جدا، هي القلب النابض للقارة الإفريقية، وكذلك أيضا هي النبراس لكل قيمها الثقافية ولحضارتها، والعمل على التأكيد على الهوية الإفريقية بشكل أساسي من خلال الشباب ومن خلال المرأة، والعمل على يعني إعداد الشباب بشكل أساسي لقيادة المستقبل في أفريقيا. من هنا تكمن أهمية هذه الاجتماعات التي تأتي في هذا التوقيت تحديدا في ظل الأزمات والتحديات الكثيرة التي يمر بها كل العالم، بشكل خاص بعد التحديات والتداعيات الخاصة بأزمة كورونا وأيضا الأزمة الأوكرانية، لما لها من تأثير كبير على العالم بأسره وعلى القارة الأفريقية وعلى التجارة والاستثمار في القارة الأفريقية. هذا أيضا يبرز الدور الهام لمصر في القارة الأفريقية، هي واحدة من أكبر الاقتصاديات في القارة الإفريقية، بالإضافة إلى المهم والقيادي
economies in the
Pan-African, especially in the private sector, and difference to the projects
that have been implemented in the African market as a promising market. Our African continent reminds us for the strategic 2030 vision for the Egypt country.
المستقبل وكما يؤكد السيد
Africa is the promising and the future.
لقاءاته الخاصة بالتحديات.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi reiterated
التي واجهها العالم
that despite these crises that had been faced by the world, the Ukraine-Russian crisis and post-COVID crisis,
دعم وتمويل المشروعات المتوسطة والتنمية الاقتصادية كما
and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi reiterated to support the growth of small and medium business enterprises and the private sector to support the African small and medium business. The Afreximbank from long time ago has supported the African countries.
يطمح للمزيد من العمل المشترك من الدول الأفريقية.
The Afreximbank is looking for joint cooperation among the African countries and call for more support and gain more share capital for supporting and promoting the enterprises. And this official opening meeting will host more than 3,000 banking, international high-level government and international personalities, representative of regional and international institutions on its top. The International Monetary Fund. In here we are making the best use of the African youth. Actually, the African continent is a youth continent, especially to empower the African youth and benefiting from the inspiring ideas for the creative powers. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Excellency, this is really important for the, and it's significant as African countries, and empowering the entrepreneurs, African youth, women, and the human cadres to cope with what's all happening in our era with new technologies and developments which be witnessed by the whole world with crises and development of our eras. There is a great interest in the African continent to activate the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement to reach to the future Africa, to work on both the history and the future of African continent. These were one of the major themes and topics for the titles of the more than 30 sessions, and there are two important and significant exhibitions to promote and support small and medium businesses which cope with
التجارة الحرة الأفريقية، وذلك من أجل تحقيق الهدف الأكبر تفعيل هذه الاتفاقية بشكل أساسي، بالإضافة أيضا تفعيل كل ما يتعلق بالبنك الأفريقي للتصدير والاستيراد
Import-Export Bank to diversifying
كل ما يقوم به هذا البنك مؤخرا والتعاون مع البنك المركزي المصري. هذه الاجتماعات ينظمها البنك
These meetings are organized by Central Bank of Egypt with the Afreximbank, African Import-Export Bank. This is the dream of the founders of the African governors for a better future and drive the economic transformation and the cooperation for the developmental projects.
تأتي أهمية هذا المؤتمر أو هذه الاجتماعات.
These meetings are critically important
الإمداد العالمية، ومن ثم وجب
for the current
هذه سلاسل التوريد العالمية في مرحلة ما بعد كوفيد-19 والأزمة الأوكرانية والفرص والتهديدات التي تواجه اتفاقية فقط التجارة الحرة القارية الأفريقية، والتي يطمح الجميع
رغم اختلاف اللسان وإن البشر ألوان متفرقين في النوايا والشكل والأديان، لكن إلهنا واحد، رب البشر واحد، بالحب جمعنا
وكلنا إنسان، وتعالوا بحضن النيل وحضارة وادي النيل، فاتحين أحضاننا قلوبنا بيوتنا وبرضه قليل.
أسمر وكان فنان، عالحلم عينه تبان، شمس الصبح ترعاه وفي المساء حكايات. أفريقيا أرض الخير،
أولادنا لسه بخير، بلاش نرقد بشمسك، حبك لينا كبير.
Our nations united together. Our nations united together. Les yeux tournés vers l'Afrique, amis du monde entier, rêvant de paix, d'amitié pour la vie. La vie.
رب البشر واحد، بالحب جمعنا وكلنا إنسان، وتعالوا
United together.
حضارة وادي
Our nations united together.
نحن الآن مشاهدين في انتظار تشريف
Ladies
السيد
and
الرئيس
gentlemen, we are waiting the
السيسي
President
للافتتاح
Abdel
الرسمي
Fattah al-Sisi, His Excellency, to
الخاصة
open
بالاجتماعات السنوية
the
للبنك
annual
الأفريقي
meetings
لتصدير
for the
واستيراد
African
أفريكسمبانك.
export
هذه
and
الاجتماعات
import
كما
bank,
ذكرنا أنها بتنعقد
Afreximbank.
في توقيت في منتهى الأهمية.
This is a
ربما
critically important
الجلسات
typing,
التي سوف
especially
تنعقد على
the
مدار
sessions
4
are going to be held within the next 4 days.
عامة ورئيسية، ومن أبرز
This is
هذه
the main
الجلسات هي التي تتحدث عن
plenary
كيفية
sessions,
تفعيل اتفاقية التجارة الحرة
especially
الأفريقية
for the
القارية،
continental
وذلك نحو
African Free Trade Area Agreement
للتحول نحو العالم المتغير.
and many changes to transform
الجلسات التي ستنعقد خلال الأيام القادمة.
These especially the meetings are going to be held, and there is a title for activating the free trade agreement, especially for the future of Africa, especially empowering the African youth. And there is a development for all the capabilities of the youth, and to work on the human cadres. Especially we are seeing recent changes in our recent era.
على مدار الأيام القادمة كل ما يتعلق بتحقيق الاندماج الإقليمي.
These meetings will discuss the economic integration and activating this agreement, especially the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, as a way to transform towards a changing world. It talks about the history and the future, especially the future of economic integration of geopolitics. This is a critically significant, important, especially the geopolitics field. Especially many countries are suffering because of the Ukrainian and Russian export. The founders of the Afreximbank, the African export-import, there are many founders and many governments. Egypt is one of the top shareholders for export and import. And also there is a African Development Bank for funding and promoting, financing $1.5 billion for these countries who are independent for the European export, especially to open new markets for export. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has early announced that all the international governors and especially the private sector are going to support and promote, finance these project enterprises. Especially our African continent is really rich with the raw materials.
ومنافسة الاقتصادات العالمية لما تمتلكه هذه القارة من موارد وسواء موارد بشرية أو موارد نفطية أو ما غير ذلك.
And the African has raw materials, petrol materials, and human cadres.
كبير في جذب المزيد من المستثمرين في تعزيز.
Also, these meetings are going to attract international investors to invest in the African nation and the African continent. Also, promote and finance small and medium businesses and enterprises. These upcoming meetings are going to aim activate these enterprises and projects. Also empowering the African Continental Free Trade Market to get the economic independence. These are going to be discussed in the upcoming days. Economic transformation and the independence, the regional merging. All these topics will be discussed in the meetings and the sessions of the African Export-Import Bank, which all in a great and significant time that all the world are witnessing at the moment in the post-COVID era and Ukrainian crisis. And also there are shortage of many items and commodities, especially for African countries, to import corn and wheat from Ukraine.
الدول
which had really impacted the African nations.
هناك مردود اقتصادي مباشر وغير مباشر من توفير
There is a direct and indirect
ومن ثم يأتي المردود الاقتصادي على المواطن البسيط.
apply
ليس
for
بالضرورة أن
especially
الخبراء
every single citizen in the African nation.
الهامة ولكن أيضا المواطن البسيط
The simple citizen has the right to follow up these annual meetings, which may be impact directly or indirectly.
أزمة في ارتفاع الأسعار أو التضخم وهي أزمة تطال العالم
Especially the output
ولكن مصر
for
تستضيف هذه
the current crisis
تحت رعاية السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح
which
السيسي
are
لها
witnessed by the whole world.
أو القارة الأفريقية بوجه عام لما لها من أهمية قصوى عند
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi inaugurated Afreximbank annual meetings, which is critically important
بعد أن توقفت الاجتماعات لمدة عامين بسبب جائحة كورونا والنسخة
for the
الأخيرة
African continent after
تأتي أهمية
posing these
في هذه المرة تحديدا
annual meetings during coronavirus. Especially, we are resuming these meetings one more time after the post-era of COVID. And the repercussion of the Ukraine crisis, and Yusuf, my colleague, also Tariq Amir, the governor of the Egyptian Central Bank, that there are accelerations for the African Bank and the Egyptian Central Bank to face the huge inflation in the whole world. There are exerted efforts to face and challenge that inflation and a great exerted efforts to drive the development and create more chances and job opportunities. There are many major challenges are facing and defying the African continent. All the world are facing such crises, especially in the repercussions of the Ukraine crisis. So, ladies and gentlemen, what are all happening around the world, around us? These annual meetings for African Import-Export Bank will discuss these repercussions and challenges in different titles, focusing especially in fostering, empowering youth and benefiting their inspiring ideas to achieve the development and the integration and the regional integration. These are the main aims and goals for holding annual meetings. Yes, Reham, you have referred to the role of the bank to promote finance small and medium businesses. I would like to remind our audience that these meetings are going to be held during 5 days.
تفضلوا استريحوا تفضلوا.
Welcome. Please be seated. Peace be upon all of you.
السيد رئيس الجمهورية،
His
أصحاب
Excellency,
المعالي الوزراء ومحافظي البنوك المركزية، السادة
dear
رؤساء
ministers,
الحضور الكريم،
heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, welcome
على أرض مصر،
to the land of Egypt.
مصر الطيبة،
Egypt, the good,
بوابة إفريقيا الشمالية،
the gate, the African gateway.
الحديث عن مصر هو
Especially
الحديث
the
عن
Egypt
إفريقيا.
talk
والحديث عن
about
إفريقيا
the African
ودائما
continent.
وسيظل
So the speech of
الحديث عن مصر.
Africa will also
فلم
be
تعتبر
the
مصر
speak of Egypt.
وقتاً من الأوقات نفسها دولة
Egypt
وحيدة، بل هي
is not only our own country, but the pulsating country for whole Africa, and always the Egyptian are fostering with the Egyptian identity, are proud with the Egyptian identity. Now we are meeting in the new administrative capital, which hold the 29th edition for the annual meetings for the Afreximbank in the new administrative period, which symbolizes the new era of prosperity and success, which inaugurates 14 new cities depending on artificial intelligence in case of the development, which are being adopted by the new administrative to be this capital, not only a great position, but also a great position for whole African people. So these annual meetings for the Afreximbank to open new horizons for these annual meetings, which are supervised and organized by the Central Bank of Egypt, especially after the post-COVID era. The world are witnessing unprecedented changes. So the African continent, all of the other countries are going to look for in passion. So there is only one issue and joint challenges. So the aim for the success will be one. To talk about the prosperous cooperation with the African Export-Import Bank, we are welcoming Dr. Amr, the Governor of Egyptian Central Bank of Egypt. He's welcome. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most gracious, His Excellency Abdel Fattah El-Sisi, President of Arab Republic of Egypt, Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, Benedict Oraman, Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Afreximbank, dear ministers, ladies and gentlemen, representative of African entities and bodies, give me great pleasure to welcome you in the great and significant event, which especially the opening of the annual meetings for the Afreximbank for the year 2022. Under the title of Empowerment, the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement in order to empower the entrepreneurs and African Bank, which has been organized by the Central Bank of Egypt under the directive of President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi. In each, the Egyptian government are going to join cooperation with the African continent. Especially, I would like to appreciate the efforts of Mr. Abdel Fattah El-Sisi, Excellency, to attend this great and important event. This is the pride and in the new capital of Egypt, the administrative capital. These changes and current crises needs to have a different look, especially after post-COVID era, and also the Ukraine crisis had overlooked, which had been impacted the African countries. President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi, please, all the world are witnessing, especially the financial bodies and financial development institutions are looking forward for this meeting. Even the developing countries and the developed countries are suffering crises and current changes for the growth rates. and inflation.
مستوى دول القارة الأفريقية
The African level countries,
من عديد من المشكلات والأعباء الداخلية
there are many efforts
بطبيعة الحال
that had been impacted
تلك الصدمات
after
الخارجية
the repercussions of these international crises. Especially, there is a great burden of efforts bringing by the African continents to provide the necessary commodities for vaccinations of COVID. All the world had been directed to impose many
تلك التي تعتمد على الاستيراد من الخارج أو التي تعول كثيرا على الموارد من قطاع السياحة. ولم تكاد تمر تداعيات أزمة ذلك الوباء
tourism and traveling from country to another, which has really impacted the international economic
العالمية خلال الفترة الأخيرة.
which had been recently impacted the last period, especially the prices hikes for the necessary commodities after the geopolitics impacts for the international economy, and especially for the whole world and African countries especially. And there is a noticeable price hikes for the petrol and a prices hikes regarding the freight charges, which had been impacted the developed countries and its people. These geopolitics changes are a test for the International Monetary Fund, which had really controlled the expectations for the performance of the international economics. These changes and disorders had been witnessed, the prices hikes and the risk and threats, which really impact the financial bodies, especially in the African continent, especially to get the leadership in politics. Besides these pressure and conditions to face the current inflammation and fix these economic disorders, and especially in the post-COVID era, especially in the world and the economic and financial institution of the bodies. And there are also social responsibilities for all the institutions to adopt the mechanism and the politics to open new horizons for creating job opportunities to control the inflation and to face such changes which will get back on the right track regarding the welfare. And in the Egyptian level, of the upper level of Egypt, no one can deny that these repercussions have been impacted the Egyptian society. But we are able to overcome these challenges after the reform programs and the great politics by the Egyptian capabilities and excellent cadres, and the Central Bank of Egypt was able to work with the government to face this exceptional case, for the repercussions and provide measures, unprecedented measures, to provide financial liquidity for persons and companies, to protect the current and provide job opportunities and the necessary needs for Egyptian society, which impacted the citizens and the Egyptian market. These
ولكن بتضافر الجهود والخبرات المصرفية المتميزة والتعاون مع
by the excellent
ودعم
expertise,
قيادة
Egyptian
الدولة
expertise
باتخاذ
and the
القرارات
government leadership.
تعمل جميعا في تناغم
We are
وتعاون
working
ضمن
together
منظومة
hand
محكمة
by
لتحقيق
hand
أهداف السياسة
in a firm
النقدية وإشراف
organization
ومتابعة دقيقة من
for the
البنك
financial
المركزي
politics
الذي يحرص دائما
under the auspices
على
of the
تعزيز روح
International Monetary
الجرأة
Bank,
في اتخاذ القرار المبني على موضوعية
really
المنطلقات والمعطيات العلمية
encourages
وفقا لرؤية واستراتيجية الدولة المصرية. وأود بهذه المناسبة أشيد
the
بأداء
great
مؤسساتنا
spirit of
المصرفية
taking decision
والمالية التي أدت التكليفات المنوطة بها بكل
which
كفاءة
cope with the Egyptian government vision,
ومكانتها في عصر
and
الرقمنة
Egypt's vision settled
على
place
رأس أولوياتها
among the
تعزيز
countries,
الشمول المالي
especially for
ومبادراته لتمكين جميع
the financial
فئات المجتمع
inclusion
من الخدمات المصرفية.
and the banking
وبالفعل
services.
تولى الجهاز المصرفي تلك المهمة بكل إخلاص
And
وتفاني
the Central Bank of
لتحقيق
Egypt
رؤية القيادة السياسية
had achieved
وما
this
تصبو إليه
vision
من
and the
طموحات
leadership.
تجاه هذا الوطن. فقد عهدنا على أنفسنا أن نواكب سرعة
So we
تنفيذ
crossed
هذه
our hands
الآمال والطموحات
to
لتكون
accelerate
واقعا ملموسا
these developments to be a real
تعويض الكثير من الإنجازات التي يربو إليها المواطن المصري تحقيق حياة أفضل.
to contribute
a
better life for the Egyptian leadership, motivating the capabilities of the Egyptian economy. These sacrifices are being by the banking sector in Egypt,
وفي خلال أزمة كورونا
and during the COVID-19
أكثر من 250
and plus
روحا شهداء من أجل
more than
خدمة المواطن
250 persons
في هذه الظروف لو مثلا
had been passed away for these circumstances in the Egyptian sector, especially in the health sector.
إن البنك المركزي يثمن غاليا الدور الإقليمي البنك التصدير والاستيراد الأفريقي
Central Bank of Egypt
الذي
praised
أحد
the
الركائز
international
الرئيسية
role
لدفع مسيرة
for the
التنمية في
African
والدعم الأساسي لها
Export-Import
لما
Bank
يقوم به من توفير التمويل اللازم
provide
من الأهمية التي
the
توليها
suitable finance,
مصر للقضايا الإفريقية
especially Egypt,
والنظر في الإمكانات المتاحة لتحقيق التنمية الشاملة للقارة.
pay great attention to these
السياسية المصرية
politics.
أهمية المتابعة الحثيثة لأعمال بنك التصدير والاستيراد.
and Egyptian government is following and supporting all the African,
في رؤوس أموال البنك الأفريقي.
especially for funding the African Export-Import Bank. In the conclusion, I would like to welcome all of you to Egyptian government in the new administrative capital.
الذين لم يدخروا جهدا في
Egypt
رفعة بلدهم وتحقيق التقدم والتنمية في ظل
pay great attention for the development of the country under the auspices of President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi, this great leadership to provide stability and increase the income levels, putting into consideration all the capabilities to achieve the prosperity for all African countries. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
أفريقيا السمراء قارة الشمس
The Black Africa,
القارة الحلم
the dream country, the Africa the good, had passed many changes and challenges, and especially the integration of the African and cooperation to face all these changes. And the image is more expressive than words. Now I will show a footage for the African ambitions.
يشهد العالم منذ نهاية عام 2019 العديد من الأزمات
successive crises.
ففي مطلع عام 2020
At the beginning of the year 2020, the COVID pandemic invaded the world,
تتجه نحو إغلاق حدودها أمام حركة الطيران
towards
والسفر وانتقال المواطنين، وبما حمل في طياته الكثير من التداعيات على اتجاهات أداء الاقتصاد العالمي بشكل عام. ولكن تشتد حدتها ضراوة على دول القارة الإفريقية خاصة، فلقد تحملت حكومات الدول الإفريقية ومؤسسات التمويل الإقليمية أعباء توجيه جزء كبير من ميزانياتها نحو توفير الإمكانات اللازمة لشراء اللقاحات ضد ذلك الفيروس، وهو الأمر الذي أثقل كاهل اقتصادات الدول الإفريقية والتي تعاني أساساً العديد من المشكلات والأعباء الداخلية. ولم تكد تمر تداعيات أزمة ذلك الوباء وظهور بوادر تعافي الاقتصاد العالمي منها حتى تزامنت معها مشكلة تزايد الضغوط التضخمية العالمية خلال الآونة الأخيرة، خاصة مع ارتفاع الأسعار العالمية للسلع الغذائية الأساسية، وذلك نتيجة ما ألقته الاضطرابات الجيوسياسية التي أسفر عنها النزاع الروسي الأوكراني من ظلال قاتمة على الاقتصاد العالمي بشكل عام وعلى اقتصادات الدول الإفريقية بوجه خاص. ولقد أدت تلك الاضطرابات إلى تصاعد ملحوظ في أسعار الطاقة، فضلا عن اضطراب سلاسل الإمداد وارتفاع تكاليف النقل والشحن، الأمر الذي فاقم من انعكاسات زيادة الضغوط التضخمية على كافة الاقتصادات المتقدمة والاقتصادات النامية والأسواق الناشئة، الأمر الذي نشاهد آثاره بشكل واضح ليس على ارتفاع أسعار السلع والخدمات فحسب، بل ندرتها وعدم إتاحة الكثير منها أحيانا في العديد من الأسواق وحتى في الدول الأكثر تقدما. القارة الإفريقية قارتنا السمراء، الشمس المشرقة، الحديقة الغناء للكرة الأرضية، هي ثاني أكبر قارات العالم من حيث المساحة بعد قارة آسيا، وهي أيضا ثاني أكثر القارات اكتظاظا بالسكان. تبلغ مساحتها حوالي 30,2,2 كيلومتر مربع، وهي تغطي 6% من إجمالي مساحة سطح الأرض، وتشغل 20.4% من إجمالي مساحة اليابسة. وتحظى القارة بأشكال متعددة ومختلفة من الثروات التي حباها الله بها، حيث تمتلك موارد طبيعية وبشرية تؤهل دولها لمكانة تختلف جذريا عن واقعها. وعلى الرغم من ذلك تعاني القارة الإفريقية من مشكلات كثيرة لا يتسع المجال لسردها، ولكن لعل أبرز تلك المشكلات ما يتعلق بمعدلات الفقر المرتفعة في العديد من المجتمعات الإفريقية، وما له من تبعات متشعبة سواء على مستوى صحة الأفراد أو معدلات الإنتاجية، وبالتالي على تحميل موازنات الدول المزيد من الأعباء. ومن أبرز المشكلات أيضا التي يعاني منها معظم دول وشعوب القارة هي مشكلة التصحر وآثار التغيرات المناخية على المحاصيل الزراعية، وما لذلك من انعكاسات على السلع الغذائية. إضافة إلى ذلك فإن من أخطر المشكلات التي تواجه دول القارة الإفريقية بل والعالم أجمع هي مشكلة ندرة المياه والتوزيع العادل لها، وهو ما يزيد من الضغط على المتاح من الرقعة الزراعية في العديد من دول القارة. مصر القلب النابض للقارة الإفريقية، والتي تحرص دائما على تميز علاقاتها مع أشقائها في كافة دول القارة. ودأبت الدولة المصرية على وضع هموم ومشاكل القارة على رأس أولوياتها، ولقد تجلى ذلك في مساعي القيادة المصرية للتعامل مع العديد من التحديات المتنامية والمتشابكة خلال رئاسة مصر للاتحاد الإفريقي في عام 2019.
الذي يتعين علينا نحن الأفارقة أن نثبت لأنفسنا قبل العالم الخارجي أنه حلم واقعي سيتحقق، وأنه بالإرادة لا مكان للمستحيل.
واليوم تحتضن العاصمة الإدارية الجديدة لجمهورية مصر العربية فعاليات الاجتماعات السنوية 29 لمساهمي بنك التصدير والاستيراد الإفريقي لعام 2022 تحت شعار تحقيق إمكانات منطقة التجارة الحرة القارية الإفريقية في عصر ما بعد كوفيد-19 والاستفادة من طاقة الشباب. ويسطر تاريخ مسيرة البنك هذه الاجتماعات كعلامة مضيئة على طريق التعاون المتواصل مع مصر، حيث توجت الاجتماعات برعاية وتشريف فخامة السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي رئيس جمهورية مصر العربية وراعي جهود التنمية في القارة الإفريقية.
أسمر وكان فنان عالحلم عينه تبان، شمس الصبح ترعاه وفي المساح كيان،
إن إفريقيا هي الامتداد الطبيعي لجمهورية مصر
is
العربية.
the extension of the Egyptian government.
تحرص
Egypt
دائما
in
على
its
تعزيز
history
التعاون مع
and throughout the
أشقائها من الدول
history
الإفريقية. ولعل مصر الحاضر
is careful
تولي
for
اهتماما متزايدا بعمقها الإفريقي
the relationship between the other countries to drive the development efforts in the continent. And these situations and crises had been impacted the African continent. In this role, I would like to welcome Benedict Rama, Chairman of the Board of the Directors. Please welcome.
Your Excellency عبد الفتاح السيسي
فخامة السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي رئيس جمهورية مصر العربية، معالي السيد مصطفى مدبولي رئيس وزراء جمهورية مصر العربية، معالي السيد موديسامبو نائب رئيس جمهورية نيجيريا، معالي السيد طارق عامر محافظ البنك المركزي المصري والشريك في تنظيم
heads of international organizations, ambassadors gathered here, heads of international organizations in Africa, Your Excellencies, my colleagues at Afreximbank, and also our friends at CBE, the Central Bank of Egypt, my dear wife Chinelo, who is here with us, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you today to Egypt, the host country of Afreximbank, the land where history is made, the land that makes history. For about 7,000 years, Egypt has been shaping the history of mankind and helping to evolve its art, science, engineering, and architecture. From the pyramids and the Sphinx of Giza to the temples and tombs of Luxor, from the Suez Canal to the Aswan High Dam, Egypt never ceases to leave monuments of history. And today, in this new administrative capital, we've become living witnesses of another history of monumental proportions for mankind. We bear witness to a new administrative capital that rose miraculously from the desert sands in less than 7 years. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the notion that Africa cannot rise again has once again been debunked. We stand on the pedestal of the work done here in Egypt to say that we can if we dare. We thank His Excellency, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and his able government for hoisting the African flag high. Your Excellency, the successes you have achieved in Egypt, as well as during your tenure as the chairperson of the African Union in 2019 proved to us that we can, with determination, focus, and unity, turn the enormous potential that abounds in Africa into a powerful force for change. At Afreximbank, we share your commitment to Africa. We put Africa first in whatever we do. When the COVID-19 descended upon us in 2020, Africa was left to fend for itself. Amid these challenges, Afreximbank launched the Pandemic Trade Impact Mitigation Facility. And by December 2021, Afreximbank had disbursed over $7 billion to African governments, central and commercial banks, and SMEs. And as vaccine nationalism raged, and access to vaccines became a function of how much money anybody put on the table, Afreximbank responded to the request of the African Union and worked with the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team to put in place a $2 billion advanced procurement commitment guarantee facility that made it possible for Africa to acquire 400 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccines. Beyond the funding, Afreximbank worked with the AU to create the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Trust and the No-Fault Compensation Scheme Trust as structural elements to underpin the vaccine transaction. These are now being institutionalized by the African Union as permanent structures for Africa's health security. Your Excellencies, the ongoing Ukraine crisis presents new challenges to Africa. Difficulties in accessing grains, fertilizers, and petroleum products have led to galloping inflation in many of our countries, which we are just about to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Mindful that Africa's problems are for Africans to solve, Afreximbank has once again stepped in and put in place a $4 billion facility to enable African countries to respond to the Ukraine crisis. It is therefore evident that Afreximbank has become a vital instrument for crisis intervention. The successes of the interventions reminds us of the urgency not only to support our own institutions, but to make them stronger and more effective. With its limited resources, Afreximbank made a significant impact in helping Africa to contain the pandemic. A stronger Afreximbank, and indeed a stronger group of African development finance institutions, can be one of the solid pillars on which Africa's development can be built. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, looking ahead, we can no longer accept that after 60 years of independence, Africa remains weak and economically fragmented. We can no longer continue to espouse the benefits of an integrated continent, but do little to achieve it. Africa's payment systems, key to economic integration, are fragmented and disorderly. An Egyptian that wants must first find a third currency and make the payment through a complicated, time-consuming and costly process. If the Ugandan government wants to award a road contract to an Egyptian or South African, it must make sure it has foreign currency to pay for the works. The consequence is that trade is diverted and African contractors become disadvantaged in bidding for contracts within Africa. Similarly, a truck cannot travel and carry goods from Cairo to Cape Town without posting multiple transit bonds. And why is it that standards for simple goods used in Kenya are different from those in Senegal? Afreximbank is a firm believer that we can only begin to resolve these questions through aggressive pursuit of inter-African trade and supporting the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement implementation. And through our inter-African trade division, we have in the past 5 years disbursed over $20 billion in support of inter-African trade. And we plan to double this figure in the next 5 years, thanks to the capital increase that is in process. And thanks for the Egyptian shareholders for supporting that capital increase. And in doing these disbursements, we're also supporting African contractors to bid for African infrastructure-related projects. Over the last few years, 4 years or so, about $12 billion of such projects have been supported. Your Excellency, we are proud that the Egyptian contractors have been our strong partners in this effort, working with us to build critical infrastructure across Africa. For instance, we supported the largest inter-African EPC contract amounting to $2.9 billion for the development of the Rufiji Dam in Tanzania that will produce over 2,000 megawatts of electricity. El-Sisi and Arab contractors, both of Egypt, we are the main contractors. We are supporting Egyptian contractors building solar power plants in South Sudan and DRC, gas-fired power plants in Angola and Zambia, and other power, ports and road infrastructure projects elsewhere in Africa. We thank Hassan Alam, El-Sisi Electric, Orascom Construction, Wadi Digla, Sandcrete, and other Egyptian contractors that we are working with in trying to deliver projects across Africa. Similar support have also gone to other contractors, including Mortar and Gel in Angola and some Burkinabe contractors doing road and other infrastructure projects in West Africa. Permit me to provide an update on some of the AFCFTA and continental integration initiatives that His Excellency, President El-Sisi, mandated us to deliver during his AU chairmanship in 2019. I am pleased to report that we have now completed the pilot phase and launched the commercial operations of the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. 8 African central banks and over 45 commercial banks have joined the system, and quite a number are in the pipeline. So African currencies, we can now trade amongst ourselves using African currencies, thereby domesticating inter-African trade payments and potentially saving the continent over $5 billion in transfer charges when fully implemented. A major positive impact of this payment system will be a potential reduction in external debt incurred by African countries as they invest in infrastructure. with PAPS, that's the payment system. The Ugandan government I mentioned earlier can pay an Egyptian contractor in Ugandan shilling, and the Egyptian contractor will receive Egyptian pounds. Afreximbank will clear the payments, clear the transactions, and we are backing them with currently $500 million with plans to raise to $3 billion. Your Excellencies, we have also made progress regarding introducing a collaborative transit guarantee scheme. The bank has now been admitted as a regional transit guarantor in the commercial region and expects to soon expand coverage over the entire continent. We can now reasonably be confident that when the Cape to Cairo road, championed by you, Your Excellency, becomes effective, that the truck driver carrying goods from Cape to Cairo can only do so with one transit bond. It does not need to stop at every border. Our board has also approved a limit of $1 billion to make sure that this facility is effective and makes trade smooth and seamless. Mindful that it is access to information that will help bring down the borders that fragment the continent, we and the AFCFTA Secretariat have made significant progress towards implementing the digital AFCFTA project called the Africa Trade Gateway. This service complements the highly successful biennial inter-African trade fair launched here in Egypt in 2018 by Afreximbank, the African Union, and AFCFTA Secretariat. We are providing trade confirmation lines and correspondent banking services to African banks to support intra and extra-African trade. So far, the bank has onboarded nearly 500 African banks and opened credit lines for 170 in 38 countries. About $4 billion in limits have been created. We target to give $8 billion in limits. Today, our President boasts of the largest network of connected African banks to ensure that no country is deprived of trade services on the continent. And as international banks continue to withdraw from Africa, our Afreximbank is developing a strategy to support strong African banks to fill the void, so that African financial markets can be in the hands of Africans. The Chinese system is in the hands of Chinese. The European system is in the hands of Europeans. The American system in the hands of Americans. The African system must be in the hands of Africans. We are pleased to be working with Bank MIS, National Bank of Egypt, Bank Ducaire, Vista Bank, Coris Bank, Oakwood Green, and other banks on the continent as we pursue this continental strategy. I'm also pleased to report that financial performance remains strong. Total revenue crossed $1 billion in 2019 and has been rising steadily, notwithstanding the challenges. Net income rose by 25% between 2020 and 2021 to reach $381 million. And total assets and guarantees reached $25 billion at the end of 2021. Capitalization is strong, with shareholders' funds rising from $3.4 billion in December 2020 to $4 billion by December 2021. Due to the general capital increase endorsed by the African Union and launched in 2021, new equity raised have now exceeded $1 billion. And when adjusted for the discount, it's now exceeded $1.25 billion. We are targeting to raise additional 2.6 billion. So we are almost halfway, just a few months after launching the capital increase. I would like to thank the shareholders, African Union member states, for being very, very supportive of this process. We invite those who are yet to contribute to do so, because as we know, it's a stronger Afreximbank, stronger development finance institutions in Africa that can make the difference. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as I close, join me in extending our appreciation to His Excellency, President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi, under whose auspices these meetings are holding. I would also like to express our appreciation to all shareholders, our board of directors, His Excellency Osama Madbuli, the Honorable Prime Minister, His Excellency Vice President Sambo of Nigeria, all the governors of central banks, ministers who are here with us, the members of the press, and all those who have worked very hard to make this meeting possible, especially our friends at the Central Bank of Egypt. I also like to thank our shareholders through our chairman, Minister Mike. To all our guests, many of whom are also our business and development partners, we say a big thank you. And finally, to my lovely wife, I say thank you for being here. You're always there in good and bad times. I thank you for your kind attention.
Africa land rich with the raw materials and the human cadres is a part of the international organization, and we are working together, are witnessing great repercussions that had been impacted and witnessed by the international countries and the light shadows. Now we have the pivotal and plenary session about the African facing external shocks and internal challenges. Please welcome Tariq Amir, the governor of Central Bank of Egypt, Kalialia, governor of Zambian Central Bank, and Excellency Vera, Secretary General Secretary for the United Nations, Mr. Albert Muchanga, the Commissioner of the African Afreximbank in terms of industry, culture and agriculture, and Rosa Winker, the executive of the African economy. This session is managed by Dina Salim.
Your
Excellency President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi, Excellency presidents of African countries, governors of the central banks of Africa. It's a great pleasure to host and organize and manage this session to face the internal and external shocks, especially the recorded footage had been dealt in details. Now we are talking with the heads of the international experts in a great friendship. We please commit to the timings of each speaker for 3 minutes to each speaker for the available time to cover other important and significant topics today. And you can follow our timing through that screen. Now we will give a hint and a brief about the Egyptian government and circumstances, measures had been done by the Egyptian state and the Egyptian government. Now Mr. Tariq Amr, the governor of Central Bank of Egypt. Please welcome. Go ahead.
بالنسبة للأزمة الأخيرة أني واحدة فيهم عشان هم كتير.
عندنا COVID-19 وعندنا طبعا الأزمة الروسية.
Now we are talking about COVID-19 and geopolitics in the African continent and the Ukraine crisis.
الأزمة الأولانية كوفيد كان
The main trend was twofold. We had the axis of neutralizing the impact of the crisis and pumping a lot of funds and liquidity to different economic sectors, especially the private sector as well as individual sectors, in order to preserve labor opportunities
and loss of jobs. So the Central Bank of Egypt had pumped many monitors and sent guarantee letters to cover these inflammation and inflations under the patronage of the Central Bank of Egypt, that all the banks are afraid to bear such risks. These losses, especially the working percentages, how to keep the price hikes, and this internal shock, there were external shock as well by the international market and the central bank for the monetary reserve to keep the exchange rates and to avoid the society the impact of the exchange rates, which had really succeeded this politics. These are the two pivotal rules regarding the COVID surge and the monetary surge. For the Ukraine crisis and the shock and the price hikes, the doubled of fuel and petrol prices, besides the agriculture prices, especially Egypt, are importing food commodities. The national reform program had achieved its role to protect the reserves. And we were able to organize the external trade gradually in a style that cannot affect the productivity, to employ and give the priority for the exchange currency in order to make the best use our sources by the international and foreign monetary. Thank you. Thank you, Governor of Central Bank of Egypt, and thank you for committing to the time Of course, we have overcome such crises. Now we are going to listen to Mr. for his role in his country.
شكرا جزيلا. وكما ذكر زميلي السيد طارق عامر، ولكن التحديات كانت أكثر عمقا، خاصة حين جاءت الجائحة وبالطبع أثرت كثيرا على عدة مناطق وعانينا.
When the pandemic hit in 2019-2020, we didn't have a fiscal space to respond to the challenges as others were able to. And Zambia did not close down the country because of that issue. But from the central bank's point of view, we stepped in using our role as a lender of last resort to try and preserve the financial system. Mm-hmm. So we set up a fund which was designed to assist those entities which had suffered as a result of the pandemic. But as you appreciate, during that time, I mean, demand was quite low, so it was a challenge to push that through because we were not giving it for free, although we had set the interest rate at the rate of the policy rate with a margin, a small margin. But that created some support. So fast forward, we had elections in 2021. There was a change of government, and then we had the new crisis. But realizing that at the core of the problem that the country was having was the debt overhang, because in 2020, as a country, we defaulted on our commercial credit. So the new government moved in quickly to try and resolve the issue of debt. We had earlier conversations with the IMF because the creditors had insisted that for them to sit around the table, we needed to have a credible macro framework. So that meant us to engage with the IMF. We had been engaging since 2015, but we did not really get into a program. So, but when the new government came, I think there was a lot of resolve to get this matter resolved, and we were able to reach a staff level agreement early in December. The expectation was that we would do straight away go into debt restructuring. Then the Ukraine challenge came about. We saw diversion of focus in that their supporters were kind of caught up in the other areas as well. So this has drawn on the common framework, which is the framework which we are trying to get the debt support, restructuring support, could not take off. It has only today is when actually the meeting of the official credit committee is meeting. So there are some challenges. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا معالي المحافظ.
Thank you, His Excellency.
Mr. Governor of the Zambian Central Bank.
Now we are Dr. Vera Shondmi. She has a great expertise in the International Institute for financing many countries. In the light shadows of the crisis starting from COVID-19, and we can find all countries are in major crises.
COVID-19, as we all know, I was asking about current crises. Do you think that Africa should expect
the monetary and the funds are directed to her before these crises?
Manage its pumps of financing. Its pumps of financing. How do you think Africa should regulate such funds?
And for the question, it's a pleasure and an honor to be addressing this very august audience and to congratulate, of course, Afreximbank and the Central Bank of Egypt for this. Let me answer your question quickly, and I'll break it into three parts. I think it is important for the continent to expect external assistance, and I don't think there is any shame or sort of conversations around that. If we remember, the next deepest crisis before this 2020 crisis was the financial crisis. When we had the financial crisis, the international community came together and issued something that we called special drawing rights, which is essentially printing new additional resources to help the then European countries that were struggling with the financial crisis to come out of that crisis. So we believe that today, as Africa and as the developing world is struggling, we need the international community to issue new special drawing rights so that Africa can actually manage. The governor of the central bank just talked about shoring up the currency of Egypt, which means strengthening the currency. If we get special drawing rights, Egypt gets $2.8 billion tomorrow morning in the central bank. That is an additional 7% of its reserves. Egypt today imports about $2.8 billion of wheat, grain, and other things from Russia and Ukraine. The price of that has gone up by 47%. You need additional resources to be able to do that. So that's the first thing. We need resources from the international community. We need it yesterday. We need it now. Of course, the second thing that we need is to improve on domestic resource mobilization. Maybe one of the silver linings of the crisis has been that logistics trade has increased. The Suez Canal, and again, congratulations to Egypt and all the work that you've been doing, imports and revenues from the Suez Canal are up about 60%. You're getting about $66 billion just last year from the Suez Canal traffic and transit trade. All transportation costs has gone up by almost 30%. So there is revenue there that we can put back in. But finally, I think one other thing that we have to do is trade more with each other. Because if we trade more on the continent with each other, $2.8 billion of wheat coming from Russia, another $2.something billion of combined imports from Ukraine and other places, we could actually trade that on the continent, create more jobs. And finally, just to say that one of the big opportunities is for the youth. We are working today with Minister Hala, who is here, on something called the Youth Economics Network. But I just read that the first biologist, woman scientist on the continent was an Egyptian woman, Samira Musa. She was a biomedical technologist. Imagine if we had her here with and the climate crisis and all those other things. It will create jobs, it will generate revenue, and will, of course, make us less reliant on sources for our growth and development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Songwe.
Of course, Dr.
Songwe had referred to a critically significant point: increase the bilateral internal trade. Now we are the commissioner of the Afreximbank for industrialization, trade, and agriculture. What are you going to do, especially for the bilateral and joint cooperation between and among the African countries, which is really rich with its resources?
I salute His Excellency the President, the Prime Minister, and all dignitaries. Let me say that Professor Rama made the task very easy for me, because he outlined the portfolio of lending they are doing across Africa to promote intra-African trade. And since there's very limited time, I'm just going to give you 3 examples. One is the issue of quality infrastructure. In order to promote safety and quality assurance, to promote competitiveness, and also remove technical barriers to trade, we need quality infrastructure. So we are working with the African Standards Organization, ASO, and we've come up with an African quality policy document, which was endorsed by the ministers responsible for industry, as well as the heads of state and government. And on that basis, we're going to develop the Made in Africa standard. And that is going to prompt the development of, or the increased investments in manufacturing. Secondly, the issue of manufacturing itself. The African Export-Import Bank has developed an automobile strategy, and is going to come to the Ministers of Trade, the Ministers of Industry for endorsement at the African Union. And when that is done, it's going to open up market possibilities for car manufacturers across Africa to invest in the automobile industry. And already they've availed $1 billion for that. So it is generating interest by the private sector to invest, and also creating a revenue base for the African Export-Import Bank. The third example, which is the final, is a question of export diversification. Way back in the 1970s, Africa's share of global trade was 6%. And right now, as I'm talking to you, it's around 2.7%. And therefore, we needed to redress this slide. And we are working with the African Export-Import Bank to come up with an export development and export diversification program. And through that program, we expect a lot of interest from companies that want to export beyond Africa in the rest of the world, to come up with the high quality products and ensure that we go into manufacturing, agro-processing, and trade in services exports. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا.
Excellency, Commissioner.
And of course,
now we are talking about the intertrade, and the economy in Africa had major dimensions, especially in the workings. Now we are to welcome Rosa Whitaker, the CEO of the Whitaker Group, especially handling infrastructure, agriculture, and power resources. What are the challenges that are being faced by the private sector in these current crises?
Investments across Africa, we're looking at basically 4 crisis points that are also opportunities. One is the issue of capital. The cost of capital and the paucity of capital is literally crippling opportunities across the continent. When we look at the financing gap for infrastructure, health, and education alone, we're talking about $213 billion a year. Financing gap, that's a staggering number. So how do we address it? I do believe we have to critically look at natural resource management and harness the $28 trillion estimated in subsoil assets. I believe we now know how to do that in a way that can protect the environment and promote development. I also think that there's another C besides capital. There's the issue of climate. There's an old African proverb that says that you ought to make sure you're not the last person at the bar, because you may get stuck paying the bill. And I really believe that this is the position that Africa finds itself in now. You're literally paying for the drunkenness and debts of others. But there's also a great opportunity, because when you look at the green economy, it is now has a market value of $4 trillion, which is equal to the fossil fuel economy. 6% of the global market cap value is in the green economy. Tremendous opportunity for Africa's business, of investors in Africa, and for development. And then, of course, there's the crisis, which is also an opportunity of connectivity, physical connectivity and digital connectivity. And I believe there's been a lot said about that, but as Paul Collier has reminded us, that in Africa, 30% of the people live in landlocked situations. Outside, that's 3%. And finally, there's the issue of capacity. And I just want to say we have to upskill. Just like the Industrial Revolution created the working class, people are saying that the fourth revolution will create the unworking class. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you
so much.
الكثير من
Thank you. I think that Africa has its own resources, and many major countries are strongly dealing with these things. Now we are talking with a great banker in our African and Afreximbank, and he is the head of the African business. What about the economic integration, especially a sensitive point here, and depending on the new technologies?
It's working. Now it's not.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and let me say thank you to Afreximbank and the Egyptian leadership for hosting us here in Cairo today. And I'll go straight to the point. For over 3 decades, I have been a champion and an activist. I'm a bit less of an activist now because I'm older, of African integration. I think the future of our continent lies in the north of Africa looking south and the south of Africa looking north. It is not acceptable for us to be able to travel in Africa with European passports easier than it is with African passports. It is not acceptable. It is not acceptable for Africa to be deindustrializing, and I think you've just pointed out what's going on, because we refuse to electrify our continent. Industries require electricity at a higher level. That should be happening. It is not happening. The issue of COVID, Ukraine, the global supply chain, that will be solved. Governments will work to solve it. Multilateral agencies will do it. And price adjustments will do it. But ultimately, we have to draw lessons from what's going on. And that lesson is that Africa must work to integrate its payment system, its transportation. It must work to build scale, because only by building scale do you begin to absorb shock when it happens. I have been to virtually every African country. I've done that in the private sector, not in the public sector, because I believe that to be African, you have to know Africa. And the major projects being undertaken by Afreximbank now move us from talking to doing. If I have one last comment, ladies and gentlemen, is let's talk by all means, but let's do more. Let's not come back in 10 years and say, what is the future for the Africa Continental Free Trade? What is the potential? I spent 3 decades, and we kept talking about potential until I retired. Let's now get things done. Thank you.
Good message and address delivered. We have to start and let's get done. Now I would like to ask the His Excellency President Abdel Fattah if he has any comments, please.
شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you so much. In reality, I would like to start my speech to congratulate and praise and welcome all the African leaders and representatives of banks and the future we are hoping for Africa. And I have a comment on the discussion you have taken through the economic point of view and the capabilities of banks and its directions. The last comment was said by Mr. Mbeki,
هو ده اللي لفت نظري.
that paid my attention, that I can start with the speech about my contribution to our African country. And I have to say, we are talking about a very long-term dreams in Africa to see the vision of 2063. This is the hope we are looking for. And I will talk in my point of view, not only about the economic point of view, but in the point of view of the country and the Egyptian state. How could the country implement all these projects in every year and every occasion that are not achieved? What is the missing point between the reality and this observation and the executive steps that we are looking for in Africa, in the whole world, not only in Africa in particular, but in the whole world generally? And we have the chance to compare the data, the investigations data, and the targets. We have more than 20 countries that are the most rich countries, the richest countries. Now we are 190 or 20 countries, so 20% of the whole countries can face the crisis, the industrial and agricultural crisis. What about the other countries that are being left? Now you have talked about the COVID surge and the Ukraine crisis. We can get more implications and solutions out of this dilemma and crisis. But is the African continent ready to achieve the people's hopes? I will give you an example in Egypt. When we talk about Egypt and the infrastructure development and find a suitable infrastructure to work or to have a better business during the past 7 years, and I'm not exaggerating, that we are talking about, I will just transferring that to dollar, around 400 or 500 billion dollars. I'm talking about a country, its capacity 1 million square acres. So how and we are talking about the integration among African countries. What about the infrastructure that can achieve this target for the African nations and Africans? How does it cost, and where can we cover these costs? If you would like to change the face of the African continent and made it a continent that's able to achieve the hopes of its peoples and youth, the infrastructure, I talked about the power stations, and I've talked about the railroad station and road transportation and port transportation. Who is capable to achieve such things? The European banks are ready to fund loans despite the high risks in Africa, that can give these funds by low interest. Are you ready to fund the African countries, for the African countries with a huge investment to implement that infrastructure? So the first challenge that for our African continent is to get a continental infrastructure and the presence of the people and officials of finance, water, economy. This is the dream of people, especially in the overpopulation countries, and this is the hope for the African youth. And we are talking from $1 billion to 2. Now we are get an overpopulation for up to 2 billion people. Especially the Egyptian youth cannot go to Kenya by train or Ethiopia by train. There is no transportation. There is no railroad transportation. There is no road. There are no ports that connect each other. There are no airlines that cannot connect each other. What about the politicians, the designated politicians? How you can plan the economic capabilities? I will give you an example. Especially Ukraine. Export 60 billion tons of wheat in just 600 kilometer quadrat. How this country was able to provide these agricultural products to all countries in the world. That had been done and implemented by the political leaderships or a real ground basis. They have the current and the required infrastructure from electricity, transportation, banks, technology, and advanced agriculture. Even the granaries and the agricultural cells. So Ukraine had done a huge investment. I don't know how does it cost this transit or this transformation. We have many African countries had more than these capabilities in our Egyptian and African lands. But we need more electricity that are really costing too much. We need also transportation. We need advanced technology for our agriculture, which will affect huge amount of money. So we're not talking about 25 or 30 million. Acres. I'll not mention any countries to avoid any sensitivity and belittle any countries. And we are talking to our counterparts. We have more than 200 acres. Because what needed, what required are not existed. The main crisis, and this is the real situation we are, how we can change and transform this situation, especially how to cover these expenses up to $35 billion. I'm not saying haphazard numbers. No, this is a real situation I'm facing in the Egyptian lands here. How can I decertify land to an agriculture or able to go, to be able in agricultural lands? How we can provide these raw materials and raw sources, and how you can add value to many products such as iron. You need power, electricity, you need factory, you need ports, you need transportation. After these raw materials are industrialized to be imported and exported. These huge amount of investment. So the first obstacle I imagine that how you can provide and promote the required finance. The second point I'm talking about the stability and security that are existed in our countries are able or allowing such business. So the risks that are existed in many countries, how does it cost and reflect back to the credit? Is it a high or low risk? So it gets back to the stability factor. So these two factors, these are the base foundation for any change or suitable change for countries. If you haven't achieved this stability, no foreigner or national investor or factor will invest. Of course, how could he invest his money in a stable country or insecure country? How we could achieve this stability, how we can get gathered the African peoples together, hand by hand. This is another situation and another issue. The peoples would like to have many things, but maybe the country is not able to achieve that well. So we need not plans. How you could achieve the stability and security for countries and peoples, for its youth to achieve their hopes and ambitions. So how could the government and the state achieve such implementation? It's not my business how we could achieve that, but how would evaluate the African countries among the 20% of the 200 countries in the world? Where are our position? Where are our ranks? So our contribution, we are talking and discussing in your presence to achieve the stability and security. So security and stability are absent in a country. This country will not get processed. Is there a plan or a target or not awareness of the peoples? So how we can categorize our African countries? When if there security and stability, there is a hope. And there is no security and stability, there is no hope. So if I'm not reassuring with the country, I will go to another and invest my money in another place or another country. So I'm reiterating the points of stability and security, and I'm talking also the economic integration, how we can joint cooperation and how we can benefit if we are gathered together, and the African countries and the neighboring countries. And Egypt, if you believe me, if you are believing me, and I'm dreaming to Africa as well, I'm swearing to God, I am dreaming for Africa because these people has right to live, to achieve its dreams and live in another place and position that we are in it right now. So our dreaming with Africa as well. So I'm swearing to God, and I'm taking oh my God, I will not leave any country without assistance. And I'm repeating, oh my God, if you are providing me assistance, I will not leave any country without any assistance. How we can pass these crises, so we have our hearts together, and to avoid and hold back any problems or dilemmas that we are facing. I'm sorry to get more than the 3 minutes for Ms. Dina, that are careful, she was careful about it. And I'd like to say to the International Bank Society. Africa is in your name. And the African citizen is in a good and safe hands in your responsibility. Thank you, Mr. President. Excellency Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, I know that you are bearing great ambitions for your country, Egypt, your beloved country and beloved continent, Africa, to have availability of the finance and to achieve the stability and security. If you would like to me ask the Dr. because we were discussing the resources that we can get the required finance for African countries. Dr. Songwe, what are the resources or the institutions would help us during this hard time?
In your opinion.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Let me take the opportunity with all due respect, maybe to wear the heart of the private sector and speak for the private sector to you. Starting by saying, I think we all dream for Africa and we have that dream as well. And we hope that collectively we can do that. The reason we are here today is that we also have Afreximbank dreaming for Africa. But as you said, it is the financing. Now the financing is not difficult, and with the governor of the central bank and the minister of finance, Afreximbank with $1 can leverage 12 or 13. We are working with the Afreximbank, the Economic Commission for Africa today, to put in place something called the Liquidity and Sustainability Facility, which will reduce the cost of financing. Today, your country, performing very well on the macroeconomic space, goes to the markets at 6 times the cost of money. So Egypt borrows $1 at 6%, Italy borrows $1 at 6 cents. We need to change that. It is in your power, Mr. President, to leverage Afreximbank, to work with organizations like Afreximbank so we can reduce the cost of financing. We have pension funds across the African continent. If we pool our pension funds together, trillions of dollars of resources. When I was driving to this beautiful new administrative capital today, I said to myself, every country deserves this infrastructure. It is amazing infrastructure in the new administrative capital of Cairo. Why not have it across Africa? Egyptian companies can do that. Tanzanian companies can do that. South African companies can do that. I think, Your Excellency, if we bring together, and hopefully Egypt joins the G20 to become the G23, we take the first 3 African countries into it, we hope that this vision can become a reality. But it starts with us, using our resources, using our institutions, like the Afreximbank. We just saw $4.5 billion of new capital raised, allowed us to buy vaccines. 24,000, let's talk about that for a minute, 24,000 Egyptians died of COVID. But you have a very powerful medical industry in Egypt. But nobody buys Egyptian drugs because we are all buying it from India or from Britain or from the United States. We can finance it so that it's cheaper. But again, we need Afreximbank to do that. So I hope that the private sector that is here today wants to do that. We need your leadership, and we believe we can do it if we are able to get special drawing rights. We must get this from the United States. Mr. President, please call the United States and get it so that we can have and shore up our currency. But once we have that, Afreximbank can do better. Thank you very much. On climate change, just to finish, the next big source of resources is climate change. Today, hopefully in a few months, we will be hosting COP27 in Egypt. Again, under your leadership, Mr. President, thank you so much. 3 things. Implementation, implementation, implementation. For us to realize your dream, Mr. President, we need the private sector to finance the projects that are there. We can do it. We can do green projects, but we need that when we borrow for green projects, it's cheap, that it is affordable, that is accessible. And again, we can do that with institutions like Afreximbank, of course, African Development Bank, and the international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. And I think Dr. Moheldin, who is here with us today, is really helping us to see how the regional dimension of climate finance can help us go to this dream of Africa that particularly our youth are waiting for. So thank you so much for helping us to do that. Thank you.
لو تسمح لنا سيادة
You allow us, Mr. President, for 2 minutes. There is a comment.
Sayed Arnold Ekpi.
Arnold.
Mr. Ekpi, you have
a comment.
some input on that matter. Please share it.
تعليقي في هذا الشأن. شكرا جزيلا فخامة الرئيس.
Financing. Small banks do not finance development. Big banks finance development. If you look across Africa, the biggest bank is a $200 billion bank in South Africa. And then there's maybe 3 or 4 others, and the rest are in Egypt and Morocco. In between the whole of Africa, the biggest bank is $20 billion. We can take policies at government level, at central bank level, to build big banks. And when you build big banks in Africa, you can finance development. We've seen it. I've seen it with EcoBank. I've seen it in other markets. You, Mr. President, you see what's happening in China. They have big banks. You go to the States, they have big banks. Build bigger banks, and then they can finance development, and we don't have to go cap in hand all the time to the West, because in terms of financing, there's also risk. And the banks say we don't like the risk. But an Egyptian bank cannot not like Egyptian risk. Okay? The same thing across Africa. So I agree with you entirely, Mr. President. You touched the button, which is absolutely important. Let's build big banks in Africa.
Thank you. Mrs. Whitaker.
Yes, thank you, Your Excellency. I'm very encouraged by being here. I wanted to say that there's one proposal in the United States that's gaining support. And that is a proposal to tap into the area of our greatest financial strength, and that is our bond market. In order to provide, that's $46 trillion bond market, in order to provide bonds to Africa, working perhaps, I've suggested, with Afreximbank. Now, President Biden has proposed a similar initiative for infrastructure for Africa in the G7 group. I really believe we should create an echo chamber around this, because it's a way for America and Western countries, and even China could do this, without necessarily adding to their budget deficits. And another proposal that we are considering, and that is offering tax incentives, because we know tax incentives moves the private sector. So if you're an American company and you invest in infrastructure in Africa, you could repatriate your profits back to the U.S. tax-free, and you can also get some kind of tax credit. So those are the kind of proposals that we're talking about, and I really hope that we can create some advocacy around them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. يجب أن ننهي الجلسة.
We have to end this interesting session because we have a full schedule. I would like to thank our guests.
في هذه الجلسة طبعا السيد الأستاذ داني
كاليالا, the governor of Zambian Central Bank. I would like to thank Vera Sori and the ambassador Albert Muchanga, the commissioner for the African Union for tourism, trade and raw materials and industrialization. I would like to thank Rosa Whitaker, the businesswoman, the famous and well-known, and Mr. Ekpi, the banker, and finally Dr. Tariq Amir, the CPE governor. Thank you so much, Mr. President Abdel Fattah El-Sisi, for attending this opening meeting and give us a hint and a brief about the steps that we should take in. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
السيد رئيس الجمهورية، السيدات
والسادة، ladies and gentlemen,
في نهاية هذه الاجتماعات
at the end of these sessions and this conference, we are asking God
الآن الشكر للقائمين
for
أيضا على هذا المؤتمر.
good speed. Thank you so much, and we are happy in the prosperity and development.